My wedding day was supposed to be perfect, but my stepmother just called me adequate, then revealed a secret that could cost me my fortune if I walked down that aisle. The silk of my dress felt heavy, almost suffocating, despite the gentle summer breeze rustling through the manicured gardens of the venue. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I was marrying Mark, the man who had patiently navigated the choppy waters of my childhood and promised me a future filled with the stability my past had always lacked. Every guest was seated, the string quartet was tuning up for the processional, and I was tucked away in a small, gilded anteroom, taking one last shaky sip of lukewarm champagne. My heart wasn't pounding from nerves about the vows. It was thrumming with a low, continuous anxiety about her. Brenda, my stepmother. Brenda had entered my life like a poorly timed hurricane 15 years ago, right after my real mother passed away and my grieving, emotionally inept father decided he needed a fresh start. Brenda was meticulous, polished, and had the emotional depth of a porcelain doll. She wasn't cruel in grand, dramatic ways. Her poison was subtle, administered through passive-aggressive compliments and the complete erasure of my mother's memory. When Mark and I announced our engagement, Brenda had been, predictably, less than thrilled. A courthouse affair would have been classier, Eleanor, she'd sniffed. But I suppose this venue will do for your side of the family. My father, bless his vacant soul, had just nodded along, likely already mentally calculating the tax write-offs for the reception costs Brenda had insisted on micromanaging. The door creaked open, and Brenda swept in, flanked by my two half-sisters Tiffany and Brittany, carbon copies of her but with less expensive haircuts. "Darling," Brenda purred, her eyes raking over my gown as if measuring it for flaws. "You look adequate." I forced a smile. "Thank you, Brenda." "The guests are getting restless," she continued, not offering any genuine sentiment. "And frankly, some of your distant relatives are looking quite tacky in the floral arrangements. Remember, Eleanor, this day reflects on us." "It reflects on Mark and me," I corrected, trying to keep my voice level. Brenda tilted her head, a familiar predatory glint appearing in her eye. "Oh, sweetie, you haven't quite grasped the social reality, have you? You're marrying into our social circle, and while we love you well enough, you must understand that today is about cementing the stability of the family unit, which, as you know, has always been a bit fractured on your side." Tiffany giggled behind her hand. Brittany just checked her phone. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying," Brenda leaned in close, her expensive perfume momentarily choking me, "that while we are supporting this union financially, and heavens knows your father is footing the bill for this whole affair, you must remember your place. You've never quite fit the mold, Eleanor. You never had the polish, the connections, or frankly, the lineage that we represent." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle like cold ash on my skin. "Let's be very clear, Eleanor. When people look at this wedding, they see the Sterling name, which means they see my family. You are marrying into it. You are not, in this moment, truly one of us." My vision blurred. All the years of feeling like an unwanted shadow in my own home culminated in that single, brutal sentence. She looked at me, waiting for me to crumble, and for a split second I thought I might. I opened my mouth, ready to scream, ready to tell her exactly where she could put her so-called lineage, when the double doors behind Brenda burst open with a loud, echoing slam. The music stopped instantly. Every head in the crowded hallway turned. Standing there, silhouetted against the bright sunlight, was not the efficient, not Mark, but a figure I hadn't seen in almost 2 decades, a man who was supposed to be thousands of miles away, lost to a life I was told I couldn't have contact with. He was older, undeniably weathered, but there was no mistaking the strong jawline or the intense, sapphire blue eyes that locked immediately onto mine. He took one step into the room, and Brenda, who had been mid-smirk, froze, her entire composure shattering like thin ice. "Get out of my way," the newcomer grated, his voice deep and unfamiliar, yet resonating with an authority I'd never heard directed at me before. He bypassed Brenda entirely, his gaze fixed solely on me, the bride. "Eleanor, there's something you need to know before you walk down that aisle, something your father and she never wanted you to hear." The silence in the hallway was absolute, thick enough to choke on. Even Tiffany and Brittany had stopped preening, their carefully constructed expressions of boredom replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. Brenda, the queen of composure, looked as though she'd just seen a ghost, or perhaps, more accurately, a forgotten debt collector. The man who had just entered, my real father, the one who had supposedly vanished from my life after my mother's death, leaving me with a father who remarried so quickly he barely seemed to notice my existence, stepped fully into the light. He wasn't dressed for a wedding. He wore a dark, well-tailored coat that looked too heavy for the June heat, and his boots were scuffed, suggesting a long, hard journey. He looked like a man who had survived something terrible and was now come to claim a piece of the wreckage. "Who in God's name are you?" Brenda shrieked, recovering her voice, which now sounded dangerously thin. She finally moved, placing herself defensively between the intruder and me, her body language screaming proprietorship over the situation. "Security! Get this man out of here now!" Two uniformed ushers, clearly bewildered by the sudden shift in atmosphere, started moving cautiously toward the doorway. My father didn't acknowledge Brenda or the approaching staff. His focus remained razor-sharp on me. "Eleanor," he repeated, his voice softening infinitesimally, but the urgency remained. "Look at me. Don't listen to her." I felt completely paralyzed. My wedding day, the carefully constructed illusion of control I'd built around this ceremony, was imploding. Mark was still waiting at the altar, probably wondering why the processional was delayed by an impromptu, dramatic confrontation involving a strange, intense man. "I don't understand," I whispered, my hand instinctively going to the pearl necklace my mother had worn. You're supposed to be out west. I haven't heard from you since I was 12. What is going on?" My father took a controlled breath, glancing briefly at Brenda, whose face was rapidly turning a mottled shade of purple. "What's going on, Eleanor? Is that your father? The man you think you know made a choice a long time ago to sacrifice the truth to keep his peace and to keep her happy." He nodded pointedly at Brenda. "Sacrifice the truth? You abandoned me." The words were raw, years of buried resentment finally clawing their way to the surface. "No, I didn't abandon you," he countered, his voice dangerously low. "I was forced out, and what I'm here to tell you has everything to do with why Brenda and your father are so terrified of me being here today. It's about why they insisted on controlling every detail of this wedding." Brenda lunged forward, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "That is enough. You have no right to disrupt my stepdaughter's wedding. You are clearly unbalanced, sir, and if you don't leave this instant, we will press charges for harassment." He shook off her grip as if she were an annoying insect. The sheer force of his casual dismissal made Brenda stumble back against Tiffany. My father stepped closer to me, closing the distance until only inches separated us. His eyes held a desperate plea. "The money, Eleanor. The money they're spending on this lavish display. It's not just your father's inheritance funding this, it's leverage. They needed this perfect facade today because if you knew the truth about your mother's estate, you wouldn't need their money, and you certainly wouldn't be marrying into their world." My mind raced, trying to piece together the narrative shards he was throwing at me. My mother's estate had been settled years ago, a small, manageable sum that my father had always said was barely enough to cover final expenses. What about my mother's estate? It was settled. It was negligible, I stammered. A bitter laugh escaped him. Negligible? "Eleanor, your mother was brilliant. She left you everything. Everything she built, everything she owned, every secret account she kept hidden from your father. It was all structured to transfer to you on your wedding day, no matter who you married, provided the marriage was legal and witnessed." Brenda let out a strangled gasp. "Liar! I managed the paperwork. It was finalized." "Did you, Brenda?" My father turned his full attention to her, and the look he gave her was one of pure, terrifying retribution. Did you manage the paperwork that proved your husband was already deeply in debt before he ever married you? Did you manage the documents that stated if he were ever found complicit in concealing a major asset transfer that all of his current assets would revert to the primary beneficiary, Eleanor? He looked back at me, his eyes shining with intensity. The paperwork is here, Eleanor. I have the originals. Your mother knew. She knew what your father and Brenda would try to do. She set a trap. And today, on your wedding day, the terms are being triggered. If you walk down that aisle and say, "I do," to Mark without knowing this, you forfeit everything. You sign away your claim, and you sign over the rights to the entirety of your mother's true fortune to your father and Brenda. The air in the anteroom suddenly felt charged, static electricity prickling my skin. My breath hitched, lodging somewhere painfully in my throat. The concept was too enormous, too sudden to process. My mother, whom I remembered as gentle and bookish, had orchestrated a financial coup d'etat against her own husband and the woman who replaced her. A trap, I repeated numbly, looking from my father's intense, pleading face to Brenda's mask of controlled panic. Brenda recovered with shocking speed. Her eyes darted toward the door, calculating the time until the wedding coordinator or the groom himself would come looking for the missing bride. "It's a lie, Eleanor. He's delusional," Brenda hissed, trying to seize my other arm, but my father moved faster. He stepped between us, an impenetrable barrier of granite. "Look at her, Eleanor," he commanded, his voice low but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Look at the fear in her eyes. If this was settled, if her paperwork was airtight, why is she visibly shaking? Your mother secured her assets in a private trust, accessible only upon verification of the marriage certificate being filed today. If you proceed without voiding that process by making a public declaration, they secure everything. Your father gets the collateral he needs to pay off his failing business ventures, and Brenda gets to keep controlling the narrative." My father reached inside his coat and, with a fluid motion, pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope, worn at the edges but clearly holding important documents. He held it out to me. "I've spent 15 years tracking this down, following breadcrumbs your mother left me. I got out of my own mess just in time to intercept this. You have the power right now, Elea. You can choose stability with Mark, or you can choose truth and autonomy." My gaze flickered to the envelope, then to the heavy gold band sitting in its velvet box on the nearby vanity. Mark. I loved Mark. He was everything stable and safe, but everything Brenda had just said, that I didn't belong, that I was only tolerated, suddenly resonated with a terrible new clarity. If this wealth was real, if my mother had provided a way out, I couldn't sacrifice it just to avoid a scene. "Eleanor, don't you dare touch that!" Brenda shrieked, abandoning all pretense of ladylike decorum. She lunged past my father, her polished fingernails outstretched, aiming not for the envelope, but for my dress, maybe hoping to rip it and force a delay. But before anyone could connect, the heavy oak door swung inward again, pushed open by a frantic, sweating Mark. He stopped dead when he saw the tableau. Me, pale and frozen, Brenda looking feral, two confused ushers hovering near the entrance, and a strange, imposing man holding an envelope. "Eleanor, what is happening? The guests are standing, the music has died. Is everything all right?" Mark's voice was laced with concern, but his eyes immediately narrowed on my father. "Who is this man?" Mark asked, taking a proprietary step toward me, instinctively positioning himself as my protector. My father held the envelope steady, his eyes never leaving mine. "Mark, this is critical. Eleanor needs to examine these documents before she makes a commitment that will irrevocably tie her financial future to these people." Brenda seized the moment of Mark's confusion. "He's threatening us, Mark. He's a stalker. He's clearly unstable and trying to blackmail us right before the ceremony. Eleanor, tell him to leave." Mark looked torn, his gaze flicking between the three agitated people in the room. He turned to me, reaching for my hand. "Elle, come on. Let's go out there. We'll call security. Don't let this stranger ruin our day." The weight of expectation, Mark's plea, Brenda's desperate glare, my father's silent ultimatum, pressed down on me. I had to choose, right now, in the span of a single heartbeat, between walking toward the future I planned or facing the past that might redefine my entire existence. My fingers trembled as I reached out. I didn't take Mark's hand. I didn't step toward the door. Instead, my hand closed firmly around the aged paper of the envelope my real father was offering. "I need to see them," I stated, my voice surprisingly firm. "Right now. Tell me what I need to sign or not sign to keep this from being finalized." My father nodded, relief washing over his features, but before he could break the seal, the doorframe was filled again, this time by my adoptive father, Richard Sterling, Brenda's husband. He wasn't sweating. He was radiating a chilling, controlled fury that dwarfed Brenda's panic. He took in the scene, the open door, the stranger, the envelope in my hand, and Mark looking utterly bewildered. Richard's voice was dangerously soft. "Eleanor, what did I tell you about trusting outsiders? You are walking down that aisle in 5 minutes. Give me that envelope now." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the air grew cold. "Because if you open that, you won't just be forfeiting a fortune. You'll be forfeiting your life as you know it." Richard Sterling's presence was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. He was a man accustomed to having his commands obeyed, especially by me. His eyes, usually clouded with mild exhaustion, were now sharp, focused slits, aimed squarely at the manila envelope clutched in my hand. I said, "Give it to me," Richard repeated, his voice still quiet, but now laced with the unmistakable metallic tang of true danger. He didn't look at the stranger, he looked only at me, his presumed daughter, holding the evidence that could undo his comfortable life. Mark, sensing the seismic shift in allegiance, finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation wasn't about a disgruntled guest, but an internal family war. He stepped forward, placing himself awkwardly between Richard and me. "Mr. Sterling, I think you need to step back," Mark said, his attempt at authority sounding thin against Richard's icy command. "Eleanor is about to be my wife. We need a moment to sort this out privately." Richard didn't even glance at Mark. He moved with frightening economy, sweeping past Mark as if he were furniture. He reached out, his hand gripping my wrist, the same wrist where Mark was supposed to place my wedding ring. "You have no idea what you're playing with, Eleanor. That man is a ghost from a past you were sheltered from for a reason. Open that and you start a fight you cannot win. Give it to me, and we can forget this little lapse in judgment." My real father, the stranger, reacted instantly. He moved with surprising speed, grabbing Richard's wrist, the one holding my arm. For a moment, the three of them were locked in a frozen tableau. My adoptive father gripping my wrist, my real father gripping my adoptive father's wrist, and me, suspended in the center, holding the key to the entire debacle. "Let her go, Richard," the real father warned, his voice dropping to a guttural register. "You forfeited your right to make demands of her when you helped bury the truth about her mother." "Bury the truth!" Richard roared, finally losing his veneer of calm. He wrenched his arm free from the stranger's grasp, shoving him hard. The stranger stumbled back against the wall, momentarily stunned, but he managed to hold onto the envelope. Brenda, seeing her husband physically lash out, decided to double down on her defense. She turned her attention to Mark, bypassing the drama with me entirely. "Mark, darling, listen to me. Your fiancé is clearly suffering from acute wedding day hysteria. Her estranged biological father, who walked out on her mother and disappeared, has resurfaced with fraudulent documents trying to extort us. If you proceed with this marriage knowing he has a history of instability, your reputation and your assets will be implicated." Mark looked like he'd been hit by a car. He looked at me, his face white. "Eleanor, is this true? Fraudulent documents?" Tears were stinging my eyes, partly from the pain where Richard had squeezed my arm, partly from the betrayal overwhelming me. I looked at Mark, the man I trusted implicitly, and then down at the envelope. I don't know," I admitted, the single most cowardly sentence I had ever spoken. "I haven't opened it." The real father pushed off the wall, brushing dust from his dark coat. He ignored Richard and Brenda entirely now, focusing his entire remaining energy on Mark, the outsider who represented my only immediate lifeline to sanity. Mark, if you care about her, you need to let her examine this. This isn't about blackmail. It's about ownership. Your fiancé is about to sign away ownership of millions of dollars, a lifetime of security her mother worked for, just to avoid being late for the reception. He held the envelope out again, this time toward Mark. Take it. Read the cover sheet. See the notary seals. Mark hesitated, looking at the envelope, then at Richard, who was now breathing heavily, his face contorted with suppressed rage. Richard looked like he was contemplating violence, not just verbal sparring. "Mark, please," I pleaded, finally finding my voice again. "Just tell me what the cover sheet says." Mark swallowed hard, his loyalty clearly warring with his fear of scandal. He took a deep, steadying breath, reaching out toward the envelope, his fingertips brushing the edge of the aged paper. Just as his hand made contact, Richard launched himself forward, not towards the envelope this time, but toward the stranger's legs. He tackled the man low and hard. They both went down in a tangle of limbs and heavy fabric, the envelope flying from their grasp. It didn't hit the floor. It sailed upward, arcing over their struggling forms, spinning end over end before landing, not on the carpet, but directly into the open, ornate, white lace clutch purse that Brenda had casually set on the vanity table just minutes before. The purse snapped shut with a soft, sickening click of the clasp. Everyone froze, staring at the innocuous, delicate white bag sitting on the table. The envelope, the proof, the fortune, the trap, was locked inside Brenda's purse. Brenda looked down at the purse, then back up at the men wrestling on the floor, a triumphant, terrifyingly serene smile spreading across her face. She picked up the clutch slowly, deliberately, securing the strap over her shoulder. "Well," she said sweetly, looking directly at me, her eyes glittering with victory. "It seems we have a slight delay. Eleanor, darling, you have exactly 60 seconds to compose yourself and meet your fiancé at the altar before I decide to take a very long, very necessary walk to my car and handle this misunderstanding away from your big day." The 60-second countdown hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Brenda held the purse close, a physical manifestation of the leverage she now possessed. Richard and my real father remained locked in a desperate, silent struggle on the floor, their fight momentarily forgotten as the true prize. The envelope was secured by the shrewdest player. Mark was frozen, realizing too late that he had walked into a minefield. I looked at Brenda, at the utter certainty in her smile. If I ran to the altar now, I lost everything, binding myself to a man whose entire financial security rested on my silence, controlled by the woman currently wearing my mother's legacy in a handbag. "No," I whispered, the word barely audible, yet cutting through the tension. Brenda paused, her manicured hand resting lightly on the clasp of the purse. "Excuse me, dear?" "I said no," I repeated, louder this time. I pulled my hand free from Mark's grasp, a decisive severing of the impending union. I stepped around Mark, ignoring his confused spluttering, and walked directly toward Brenda. "You think hiding that envelope makes you safe? You think a lock on a purse is stronger than the law?" My voice was steady now, fueled by cold fury and a sudden, fierce clarity about my mother's intentions. "You don't understand my mother's safeguards. She didn't just hide assets, she hid leverage against every contingency." I looked down at the two men still grappling on the floor. "Dad," I called to my real father, using the title for the first time without hesitation. "Did you tell me about the contingency clause?" The stranger, my real father, managed to pin Richard's arm beneath him, looking up at me with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. "The contingency clause, yes, it's on the 3rd page." Brenda's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened in genuine terror. "There is no contingency clause. I saw every page." "You saw what Richard let you see," I shot back, turning back to the purse. "My mother didn't trust Richard with the details, Brenda. She trusted the notary and the witnesses. The clause states that if any signatory to the original settlement, Richard or any individual claiming guardianship over me post-settlement attempts to physically or legally coerce the beneficiary into marriage or silence on the day of the wedding, all assets revert immediately to the witnesses of the original trust, pending an emergency judicial review. I looked around the room, my gaze sweeping over the two bewildered ushers who still stood near the door. "Who witnessed the original documents, Father?" My real father grinned, a triumphant, wolfish expression that finally revealed the man he must have been before life broke him. "The two people who showed up today to give you away, Eleanor. The two people who were waiting outside the chapel doors, myself and the presiding officiant." He scrambled to his feet, dusting himself off, suddenly radiating competence and authority. He walked straight to the officiant, who had rushed in during the shouting, and clapped him on the shoulder. "Reverend Thomas, you remember signing the revised addendum confirming the clause?" Reverend Thomas, a man of the cloth utterly unprepared for this level of financial warfare, nervously adjusted his collar. I recall signing several documents, yes. Standard procedure for complex estate settlements when a minor is involved." Brenda let out a choked sound, clutching the purse tighter. "No, it can't be. That purse is mine. The documents are mine." "Are they?" I walked up to Brenda, taking control of the space she tried so hard to dominate. I gently, firmly pried the fragile lace purse from her convulsing fingers. If the documents revert to the witnesses upon attempted coercion, then the purse, which contains the evidence of that coercion, now belongs to Reverend Thomas as a custodial exhibit pending review. I smoothly unclasped the purse. My heart hammered as I reached inside. There it was, the thick manila envelope, safe and sound. I pulled it out, holding it up so Richard, still panting on the floor, could see it. "Richard," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "I am not walking down that aisle as your daughter, nor as Brenda's appendage. I am not marrying Mark under duress or false premises. I reject the merger of these two families, effective immediately." I looked over at Mark, who was watching me with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. "Mark, I love you, but I need to know who I am before I commit to a life with you. I need autonomy." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I understand, Eleanor. Go. Handle this. We can rebuild this later if you want." I looked back at Brenda, who was now openly weeping, her perfect facade utterly destroyed. Then I looked at my real father, who looked like he'd just won the war he'd been fighting alone for 15 years. I handed the envelope to the Reverend. "Reverend Thomas, please secure this. I'll see you in court." With a final deep breath of air that finally felt clean, I walked toward the door, away from the chaos, my silk train dragging across the polished floor. My real father fell into step beside me. "Where are we going?" I asked him, the first real question of an uncertain future. He put a hand on my shoulder, the gesture feeling strangely natural. "We're going to the courthouse. You're officially single. And then, Eleanor, we're going to start tracing every penny your mother left you. The wedding is off. Your new life has just begun."